Chair Heitzman, would you like to move your bill and get it before the committee?
I would. Thank you, Chair Burkle. I would move that House File 8 be recommended to be re-referred to the Labor and Workforce Development Committee.
Okay, we have the bill before us. Chair Heitzman, please tell us about your bill.
Sure, thank you. First, I guess I would like to start the discussion around House File 8 with a little bit of personal background on myself. This issue is extremely important to me, and as I've been visiting with media and folks have had questions and asked me more about what this bill's intent is, I have tried to bracket the entire discussion, and I'm glad it was brought up earlier actually, that the idea of this bill is front and center maintaining standards. Making sure that we're looking for the opportunity to get permitting and to get permits moving in a direction that helps job creators, helps municipalities as they are applying for these permits. So I'm just going to do a walkthrough of the bill, and members, if you have the bill in your packets, or for the public who may be following along, I'm going to just go section by section and give folks the opportunity to just hear each of, there's about 9, I think, consequential provisions that are very important to stakeholders around the state. And I'll just say this is a starting point. There's lots of opportunities going forward, and we would have loved to have had our DFL colleagues with us today, but they've chosen not to be a part of this conversation. They are absent today. As I mentioned earlier, we invited MPCA. They are also notably absent today, but that doesn't mean that these conversations will not be happening. We're going to be doing everything we can to make sure stakeholders, that advocates, those that have an interest in this issue are engaged. And I hope that our colleagues will be here sooner than later to assist in that process. So just starting in section 1, and I'll make my way through it. I'll just read through my notes, and if you have questions, members, feel free to jot those things down. And then there, of course, will be those from the public that have signed up to discuss this bill, address it in their testimony also after I conclude my comments. Section 1, application extensions. Reduces the number of 60-day extensions. And if you're following along, and I won't mention the lines in every single one of these provisions, but just starting in lines 2.21. Local units of government can get to make decisions. Well, I'm just going to restart that, excuse me. Reduces the number of 60-day extensions local units of government can get when it has to make determinations under the Wetland Conservation Act to 1. As opposed to numerous, unless the applicant agrees to more extensions. Section 2, permitting efficiency. This section deals with permitting efficiency. Key items in this section would include, and there's 4 bullet points in this section that I'll make, making the MPCA issue its permitting efficiency report 2 times per year instead of 1 time per year. With that change that we're making in this bill, we'd like to see what's going on in a more timely manner, okay? Bullet point 2, breaking out data on permits that don't meet timeline goals. Right now, the data lumps together all applicants, but we'd like to see it broken out between municipal and industrial applicants. This is really important, and there are differences. And recognizing those differences is very important. Clarifying in bullet point 3 that the failure of the MPCA to meet the 150-day goal for issuing a 2-tier permit creates a final action, which would basically allow the applicant to seek judicial review. Getting more eyes on this creates another opportunity, I think, for transparency and for accountability. The final bullet point in section 2 is requiring MPCA to immediately inform applicants if their application isn't complete. And there's stories that I have heard constantly from folks that are going through this process that are missing some very basic information, and it creates a delay. So not letting the 30-day clock restart again unless the application is missing more than 30% of the required information. There's probably more conversations to have on this, but this is a starting point, and we just decided that this would be an opportunity to address this challenging problem that folks face when they're trying to go through this process. So Section 3, permits. Section 3 would allow MPCA to issue separate permits for operation and construction. Minnesota has a very aggressive winter season, and we're always trying to time projects. I'm a builder myself. We're trying to time projects in alignment with weather. And there are opportunities, as we're reaching out and hearing from people working on acquiring permits, where a two-permit process could be especially helpful. This would bring Minnesota in line with several other states, Colorado, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan. The thought with this is get these projects going so we don't miss our opportunity due to weather, due to frozen ground. I think just this last week, my town was 27 below zero in Nisswa. So obviously things are impacted by frozen ground. So that's challenging. Section 4. Section 4 modifies existing law that allows applicants to request and pay for expedited permitting. We just heard a few minutes ago about an expedited process. If the applicant agrees to costs and timelines with the MPCA, this could be a real help to get these projects moving forward sooner. It would allow MPCA to retain the fees it charged even if it gets the permits done ahead of schedule. I think that's a perfect example of incentivizing good work. It's a carrot approach to trying to get permits out sooner than later, as opposed to, I think, arguably there are examples of incentivizing delay. Section 5, petitions for an EAW. And I know this one can be a bit of a sticking point for folks that are, in the sphere of groups and organizations, but I think this is really important, and I've decided that we're going to include this and have this conversation. This section would limit who could petition for an EAW from 100 people who live in the state to 100 people, so not reducing the number of people, but reducing where that petition can come from. So I'll just start again so it's perfectly clear. This section would limit who could petition for an EAW from 100 people who live in the state to 100 people who live in the same county or an adjoining county. Okay, stakeholders, people who are impacted directly by permits being issued or potentially delayed, all right? I think that this would keep the say on proposed projects to those who are actually affected, right? Section 6, creating the opportunity for those applying for permits to have an advocate. So this creates an ombudsman for business permitting. There's lots of folks who are intimidated by this process, maybe are new to applying for permits. There's numerous examples, probably endless ones. This section would create a new ombudsman for businesses or for business permitting at deed. Having it at deed puts this advocate at arm's reach to those applying and arguably arm's length from MPCA, and the mission would be to assist businesses of all sizes, but particularly the small ones I referenced earlier, with getting through the bureaucracy of a permit. We're not eliminating, again, those standards, and that bureaucracy has been created to make sure that we're exhaustive in our effort to get the desired protections. But let's try to help people through that process, right? Section 7, scoping EAW not required for projects that require a mandatory EIS. Under current law, applicants who fall into a mandatory EIS category still have to do a scoping EAW. This section eliminates that requirement, which will get rid of duplication efforts on behalf of both the MPCA and the applicant. And I was fielding calls from folks who had questions on this earlier today, and there's been some confusion on it, but I think that this is a good step in reducing some redundancy, as I said, and we are, again, kind of hearkening back to the discussion from earlier as we were learning about Tier 1 and Tier 2 permits. When you have a huge project and you're going to go through an exhaustive process, let's not be redundant. We already know what's going on. Let's make sure that we are not slowing down this challenging process, getting permits out by being duplicative, right? Section 8, state implementation plan revisions. This is a technical change the MPCA would need to do to get the okay from the feds to implement Section 3 of the bill that is relating to separating operation and construction permits. Again, this was a discussion we heard earlier, which is very convenient and helpful as we're talking about this issue. So the last section, Section 9, intent statement. This section is to make it perfectly clear that the legislature's intent with this bill is to update our permitting and environmental review process, but not relax, as I started with, any environmental standards. We all want clean air. We all want clean water. We want clean environment for our families. This bill does not relax any existing standards. It is an attempt to get at the process moving in a more predictable and timely manner. On just a personal note, take the opportunity to point out, I don't know that there is a legislator that spends more time outdoors than myself and my family. The greater Minnesota region, my district, the Nisswa area is a destination for most Minnesotans. And it is absolutely critical that we have clean water in the lakes area, that we have clean air, and that we are not polluting the land that we live in, right? And so I wanted this section in there just to clarify and to preemptively point out that this bill does not lower or relax existing standards, okay? That is the sections of the bill that I wanted to cover in my presentation. And then also, before we go to questions, I want to mention in your packets, members, you have a number of letters of support. I'm going to highlight a few of those for the public and for members. If you haven't gone through your packet and read every one of these, shame on you. So I'm just going to quickly mention, just in case. We've all had a busy day today. So I want to mention that there's a letter from building trades. This is 70,000 members strong. Having their support is critical to this moving forward. Jobs for Minnesotans. There's also a letter, Representative Warwas from Mining, Minnesota. There's a letter from Rams, again, Representative Warwas. I think that you might have some association or recollection of a connection there. There's a letter from pork producers in support. Minnesota Biofuels Association, letter of support. Apex, letter of support. And then there are a few that I've also mentioned that oppose the bill. And that's fine, we invite that. We invite the discussion to go through this together and figure out a path forward. So I think we have three. I think Nature Conservancy is in the audience today. They may have a few words as well as a number of others. I will lastly point out that AgriGrowth has a letter. I'm I'm thinking that it's indifferent to some extent, but they may want to testify and share their feelings for themselves today. We'll see. And then there's another letter of support from, I believe, Red River Watershed. If I've misspoken, someone is more than welcome to correct the record, but I just wanted to put that out there and mention those letters. And Chair Burkle, if there's a next step, I would look forward to that.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. I see we have a few people lined up to testify, and I'll ask that they introduce themselves for the record when they come up. First, we'll start with Lauren Cervic from Minnesota Pork. Please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Lauren Cervic. I'm the Director of Public Policy, Strategy, and Sustainability for the Minnesota Pork Producers Association, and thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House File 8. Minnesota's pig farmers and agribusinesses remain stymied in their growth potential as Minnesota continues to be a difficult place to grow and develop their businesses. A drawn-out and inconsistent permitting process paired with an increasingly burdensome tax and labor environment all add costs that at times exceed the willingness of farmers and other food and agribusiness owners to continue investing in their farms and businesses here in Minnesota. For Minnesota's more than 3,000 family pig farmers, a timely and predictable and consistent environmental permitting process is paramount. The cost to permit a pig barn in Minnesota is significantly higher than in our neighboring states, according to a study conducted by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. The review process can be frivolously delayed with an administrative pause, causing further delays, increasing timelines and costs, and at times even halting projects. Many decisions and commitments are being made by farmers prior to submitting their permits, and a consistent process for review and permit approval timeline is critical. Just like every other Minnesotan, pig farmers care deeply about our state's valuable natural resources and are committed to operating within their permits and doing the right thing for their animals, their communities, and the environment. This discussion isn't about reducing thresholds or changing environmental protections. Minnesota farmers know what it takes to manage an environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable farm. In rural Minnesota, agriculture and specifically livestock production is a key cornerstone for our economic engine that drives opportunities for local businesses, creates jobs, and adds opportunity and value to the community. Meaningful permitting reform is a vital step in the process needed to further unlock the potential for agriculture in Minnesota. Pig farmers in Minnesota's Pork Producers Association look forward to continue in the beginning of this process with legislators and agencies to find solutions that provide solutions to Minnesota's farmers while also creating opportunities for future generations and farmers and agribusiness owners. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cervic. Next up on my list, I have Andrew Morley from the Minnesota Chamber. Please introduce yourself for the record. Begin your testimony.
Hello, everybody. Chairman Heinzman and members of the committee. My name is Andrew Morley, and I serve as the Environmental Policy Director at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of HF8, legislation that updates Minnesota's permitting process. The Chamber is a statewide trade association representing more than 6,000 businesses across the state of Minnesota. As you just saw, in February of 2024, the Minnesota Chamber Foundation conducted a detailed study that provides data and analysis showing that Minnesota's environmental review process takes too long, costs too much, and makes it difficult to invest here. The report compares Minnesota's process to 10 similar states, giving helpful benchmarks for comparison. One issue to highlight from the report is, when issuing an air permit, Minnesota takes up to 6 times longer than its peers. For perspective, Illinois' average time is 110 days, while Minnesota's is 656. In that same time frame, Illinois has made an estimated 3,400 more jobs and brought in nearly $1 billion more of economic activity. Those are real, impactful numbers that could be benefiting our communities and our state. Obtaining an environmental permit does not need to be this difficult. HF8 makes a number of updates to build on our high standards and improve our review process. For example, the bill, among other items, requires the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to issue separate permits for construction and operation, limits the number of extensions responsible governmental units can take when issuing a wetlands permit, and removes the need for scoping an environmental assessment worksheet when the project falls under a mandatory category for the more stringent environmental impact statement. HF8 is technology neutral. Regardless of industry, this legislation makes it easier to invest and expand here in Minnesota and promote economic development. And our coalition makes that clear. It enjoys support from a diverse stakeholder group that includes business, labor, agriculture, construction, mining, and more. As residents, we all live, work, recreate, and raise our families while enjoying our state's amazing natural resources. Therefore, Minnesota has high environmental standards, and HF8 does nothing to lower these rightfully high standards. This bill strikes a reasonable balance between protection of our air, land, and water, and ensuring Minnesota remains a place where businesses can invest, grow, and succeed. I'd like to thank my colleagues from those industries for their support and input on the bill and for supporting the legislation here today. We look forward to working with the legislature and the Walz administration to promote economic development in our state while protecting our vital natural resources. Thank you. I look forward to your questions. And I'll add too, like Chairman Heintzman, I'm a deer hunter myself and a fisherman, and we do nothing to lower our standards. We just want to invest here more. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Morley. Next up on my list is Rob Sipp from the Red River Watershed Management Board. Please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Burkle. My name is Robert Sipp. I'm with the Red River Watershed Management Board, Northwest Minnesota. I'm the executive director up there. And today my comments will focus a little bit more on the watershed world. And again, I also want to thank Chair Heitzman and others for working on this bill. It's something that we do support. And so the Red Board, we do have several projects in our funding process right now with financial commitments of just over $39 million. Total investment in our projects to date is actually right around $70 million if you look at state dollars, a little bit of federal funding, and then a good chunk from the local governments that we're working with. And with the 10 projects that are in our funding process right now, our districts have spent about $5 million on permitting and environmental review costs. And these costs are about 30% of the non-construction costs. And so if you do have my handout, there's a listing of all the projects, and all these projects did require 89 permits from various sources, local, state, and federal. 62% of those permits were required of state agencies, DNR, PCA, Bowser, and so forth. And so just to create a little bit of awareness about some of our concerns or the issues is just a few bullet points here. The level of effort is real high to go through this process, and we understand that, and we get it going into it, but sometimes this process can take years for a project to go through that process. If we get lucky, sometimes it might be a few months or a year, but it can take a long time. Now, we also have an additional 15 projects that are in the concept phase or early development, and these projects take about 9 permits on average. So if you do the math, that's potential for 135 additional permits for those new projects that might be coming up. Page 3 of my little handout, I won't go into it, but it's just an illustration of the permits that were required of one of the watershed projects out in the Boise Sioux Watershed District out in Wheaton. Real large-scale project that required 14 permits. So a lot of permits that are being required. And we would also echo that we're not looking to relax standards. We're just really focused on permitting efficiency and streamlining. And one thing that we run into as well is with the agencies, there's differing processes, procedures, and that just adds to the ongoing complexity for us to get those projects through to the finish line. Something else that we run into is coordination between state and federal agencies. And for example, what the state does for environmental review cannot suffice for what the federal government requires and what they do. And so just a quick example, sometimes there's projects that we do jointly with our watershed districts in the state of Minnesota, particularly DNR, and if a project is being done on federal land purchased with federal dollars years ago, that requires an additional Fish and Wildlife Service review, therefore adding for more time and more complexity. And then land exchanges can be an issue too when the school trust lands are involved, so again, more time. A couple real quick examples here. We have a project that one of our member watershed districts is working on up near Warren, Minnesota. It's the Middle Snake Tamarack Rivers Watershed District. A large project, and the watershed and the federal government spent about $800,000 on permitting and environmental review. And unfortunately, at the 11th hour, a rare fen wetland was found on the project site, and that project is effectively halted. And we will not be able to reobtain that $800,000 that was spent on permitting. Something else we became aware of this last fall is that the Minnesota DNR indicated that they were potentially looking at some changes to Minnesota Statutes 103G regarding culverts. And we're not too concerned that there's going to be culvert permitting or that it may continue. It's just that there may be more permits involved and it could add to more time on some of our projects. And maybe one quick last example is up in Representative Burkle's area, there's a large project called the Klondike Clean Water Retention Project in the Two Rivers Watershed District that has an 18,000 acre rare fen wetland. And it took 1 year to develop the fen management plan and then 3 years to develop an operating plan. And that's because of all the agencies involved with wanting to have their input on the projects. Now, we do welcome input in the Red River Valley on our projects, but we are looking for more streamlining and more coordination. So just to wrap up, what is needed? We're looking for a comprehensive review of environmental permitting processes to ensure efficiency and streamlining. And we do typically spend a lot of time commenting on agency rules as they come up, and we're happy to do that, but we just feel like we're not being listened to. And we really applaud the efforts here today. So again, we'd like to see higher levels of coordination between state and federal agencies. And then lastly, to wrap up, greater recognition and acceptance of regional processes, possibly in lieu of state permitting. So up in the Red River Valley, we have something called the 1998 Mediation Agreement, and that's a whole nother topic that we don't have time to get into today. But with that, I will be done here, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Sipp. Last on my list here is Lucas Shostrom from Minnesota Milk. Please step up and identify yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Burkle and members, and thank you, Chair Heinzman, for bringing this forward. I'm Lucas Shostrom, Executive Director of the Minnesota Milk Producers Association, representing the interests of the 1,600 dairy farmers in Minnesota. I testified today in support of the bill and the amendment that were presented here today. A permit reform, to be clear, as was said before, just the order and timing of paperwork to get the permit, not debating any of the environmental standards here, has been one of Minnesota Milk's primary issues for at least the last 10 years since I've been involved, and likely long before. The amendment allows farmers and responsible government units to accept applications when it makes the most sense for them. In this case, as farms enter the environmental review process, we currently have a system where they need to go for the most expensive and longer process first, and then after they pass the process, and they all have, because we have good enough environmental standards to remain in business as farmers, we go back with the faster, less expensive, but more controversial local process. It makes sense to align these proceedings with the farmer's business and schedule, and also tighten the schedule so much as possible, as construction delays in any area can set back an entire project. So please support this effort. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shostrom. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to testify in this bill? Okay, seeing none, I do see we have an amendment. Is Representative Nelson to your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And this amendment, the A1 amendment, it really, it's clarifying that local government and any state review or EAW can be taking place concurrently. And that it's really just a clarification of the process, and sometimes there's too much who's on first, and so that's what this amendment does.
All right, Representative Nelson moves the A1 amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Okay, I'm not aware of any other amendments. Is there any further discussion to the bill? Any questions for the bill author or testifiers? Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I believe that my question would be for Mr. Morley, if you can come to the table. I understand that the bill does a whole host of things that should enhance the ability for us, just like this most recent amendment, to kind of work concurrently. And I know that there's the section of the bill that relates to the differences that exist between kind of operating and construction permits. Can you share with the committee, are there other states that do this currently? And if so, why is that important for us to adopt in this bill?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Andrew Morley with the chamber. Thank you, Representative Schultz. Of the 10 states that the report looked at, the foundation report looked at, Colorado, Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, North Dakota, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Wisconsin all have separate operating construction permits. As you can see, not a blue state thing, not a red state thing, just an efficiency thing, really. And to your question about why Minnesota should adopt it, as we heard, from Representative Heinzman, we miss construction windows, right? You can get that construction permit offered or get started on it, and then you're still waiting for your operating permit. So it's important that we separate those two out to make sure that in Minnesota, with our cold construction season, we don't, miss any opportunity here. Thank you, Representative.
Is there any further questions? Or do you follow, Representative Schultz, or you, any further questions? All right. Seeing none, Representative Heitzman renews his motion, correct?
Correct.
For House File 8 as amended. To be recommended to be re-referred to the Labor and Workforce Development Committee. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion prevails.